There was always a quietness inside me, the kind that even laughter or festival lights couldn't completely chase away. It was the silence of my father's world, a vast company built with discipline, vision, and unrelenting effort. I grew up within its glass walls and golden halls, watching numbers dance across screens and faces stiffen with responsibility, but no one tells you that in the middle of all that success, your heart can still crave something simple, something real. I never imagined I'd fall for someone ordinary. Especially a man who worked right in the heart of my father's empire. My name is Mia Shabazz. And this is how my story, my revenge, began. The first time I saw Liam, the world didn't tremble, the sky didn't change color. It was quieter than that, almost too quiet. A ripple of warmth spread through me that I couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the way he listened when people spoke, or the calm confidence that softened his eyes. We met during one of the company's annual retreats, a mandatory corporate getaway that everyone pretended to enjoy. The season had just turned. The air carried the shy chill of early autumn. Managers, interns, accountants, everyone was there, laughing too loudly, sipping cheap wine, pretending to be friends, and then there was Liam. He wasn't dressed to impress. No sharp suit, no fancy watch. Just a neatly pressed shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, and that quiet focus that made him seem apart from the crowd. There was something deeply sincere about him, the kind of man who didn't speak much, but when he did, people listened. I asked a question during one of the discussion sessions. He was the one who answered. His voice was steady, grounded, thoughtful. It wasn't just his words that caught me. It was the way he looked at me when he spoke. Not like I was the boss's daughter, but like I was someone real. That small moment left a mark, the kind that lingers in your chest long after you've looked away. Lily was also there, his childhood friend, and one of the brightest in our accounting department. I'd met her before, though never closely. She had that open, honest smile that made people trust her instantly. I noticed the way Liam relaxed around her. Their laughter was unguarded, easy. It didn't bother me at first. In fact, I liked seeing him that way. It made him human. But that night, as the retreat's bonfire crackled against the sea breeze, my thoughts wouldn't let him go. The sky was turning a deep shade of indigo. Waves brushed against the shore in rhythmic sighs. Around me, colleagues laughed, sang, flirted, the usual evening chaos. But I was watching him. Every time he smiled, a spark of warmth tugged inside me. It wasn't obsession. It wasn't fantasy. It was something steadier, a realization that this quiet man, somewhere between ambition and humility, had unknowingly touched a part of me that had long been asleep. I told myself that if I didn't speak tonight, I never would. I found him standing by the shore, hands in his pockets, eyes following the waves. He turned when I approached, a little surprised. "Hey," he said, softly. "Hey," I echoed, and then for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The sea wind tangled my hair. The scent of salt and firewood filled the air. My heart was pounding so fast I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to say something, I began, and he nodded, waiting. His calmness made it worse, or maybe better. I couldn't decide. "Liam," I said, my voice trembling just slightly, "I like you. I don't mean just admiration or friendship. I really like you." The words came out lighter than I expected, as if they had been waiting to escape. He froze, his eyes locked on mine. For a heartbeat, the world went utterly silent. Then he smiled, a small, uncertain smile. "Mia," he whispered, "you're incredible." But, that word, but, sliced through the air. Every woman knows that word. Behind it hides hesitation, fear, or some shadow of the past. He looked down for a moment. "I'm just not sure if I belong in your world." I wanted to laugh. My world? The boardrooms, the deadlines, the fake handshakes? That wasn't my world. My world was right here, in the space between his words. So I stepped closer. You don't have to belong to it, I said. Just stand beside me. He didn't answer immediately. But his silence wasn't rejection, it was the silence of someone trying to believe. We talked for hours that night. About everything and nothing. About our childhoods, the people we used to be, the people we still hope to become. I told him about my father, the man who built an empire out of sweat and sacrifice, and how I felt trapped by the very walls he built. Liam listened like no one ever had. He told me about his mother, about nights spent studying under a flickering lamp, about how he wanted to make something of himself. There was humility in him, but also hunger. A hunger I mistook for ambition. When the night ended, I knew something had changed between us. Over the next few days, we kept finding reasons to cross paths. A quick conversation here, a shared smile there. Lily teased us, though gently. She seemed genuinely happy for me, or maybe she was just being kind. On the final night of the retreat, as the sun melted into the sea, I did something reckless and brave. We were standing on a wooden deck overlooking the ocean. The others were busy taking photos, laughing, shouting over the wind. I turned to him, my pulse thundering in my ears. Liam, I said, I don't want to hide this. I don't care what people think. I want you in my life. He blinked, stunned. And then, slowly, he smiled. Mia, he said quietly, you don't know what you're asking for. I laughed, not mockingly, but with the kind of joy that comes when you stop pretending. Then tell me. Help me understand. He looked at me for a long moment. And then he reached out, took my hand, and said, if you're sure? Then yes. I'll stand beside you. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was a whisper carried by the wind, but it felt like forever. When we returned home, everyone in the office knew. There were smiles, congratulations, and a quiet pride in my father's eyes. Liam's humility only made people admire him more. He had that rare blend of charm and decency that made even cynics soften. We began to plan our wedding. My father gave his blessing. Life felt impossibly perfect, a fairy tale written in spreadsheets and champagne, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I noticed small things. Moments when Liam grew distant. Nights when his phone calls grew longer. Times when his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I told myself it was stress, the company, the pressure, the future. I wanted to believe that love was enough to fix it all. After all, when you're in love, you don't count shadows. You only chase the light, and that was how it began, my story, my mistake. And the seed of a revenge I never imagined I'd need. When I think back now, to that night by the sea, to his soft smile, to my trembling words, I don't regret confessing my love. I regret believing his, because every fairy tale has a dark chapter waiting to be written. Mine just hadn't begun yet. The morning light used to feel warm when it entered my office, a soft glow spilling over glass desks and gold frames. But lately, that same light felt pale. Almost cold. The rhythm of the company had changed. The halls that once hummed with confidence now carried whispers. My father's empire, Shabazz Global Holdings, had always stood on unshakable ground. Profits, prestige, power. But now, the numbers were whispering a different story. It started subtly. Small delays in project reports. Discrepancies in quarterly audits. Lily, my friend since childhood and now head of internal finance, came to me one morning, holding a thin stack of files. Her expression said more than words ever could. Mia, she began carefully, I think you should look at this. She laid the files on my desk, a line of red entries bleeding across the pages. These transactions don't match with our internal records. Someone's moving company funds into side accounts. I frowned. That can't be right. We have double authorization for every major transfer. I know, she said softly, and one of those authorizations is Liam's. My world paused. Liam? My husband. The man who had promised me a life of honesty, of partnership, of forever. I forced a smile I didn't feel. There must be a mistake. Liam wouldn't. Lily didn't finish my sentence. She just nodded, her eyes full of sympathy that cut deeper than accusation. I hope you're right. That entire day, my hands trembled whenever my phone buzzed. I wanted to call Liam, to demand answers, but another part of me, the quiet, logical part I'd inherited from my father, told me to wait. I spent hours poring over reports, tracing every transaction, every authorization, every digital signature. And every path seemed to loop back to one name, Liam Carter. When he came home that evening, he looked calm. Too calm. Hey, he said, smiling, dropping his briefcase onto the couch. You look tired. Long day? I looked at him, at that same smile that once made my world brighter. And for the first time, I wondered if it was a mask. Yes, I said quietly. Something came up at the office. He loosened his tie. Anything serious? My throat went dry. Just irregularities. In the accounts. He paused, just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it, that flicker in his eyes, the kind of flicker that only appears when guilt crosses truth. Then, as if rehearsed, he chuckled. Accounting errors. You know how those guys are, always panicking over decimals. I smiled back. I had to. But deep down, a chill settled over my heart. The next few weeks turned into quiet torture. Liam's charm didn't fade, it became stronger. He was attentive, affectionate, almost perfect. Too perfect. Every time I looked into his eyes, I saw a question I was too afraid to ask. At work, Lily and I continued digging. We discovered shell companies, fake suppliers with generic names, receiving payment for consulting that never happened. Millions of dollars rerouted quietly, masked under legitimate contracts, and all trails led to accounts opened under Liam's authority. I couldn't bring myself to confront him yet. Not without proof. Not without knowing why. Why would he do this? Was it greed? Ambition? Or something darker, revenge of his own? Then, one late night, as I sat alone in my father's office, the silence was broken by the faint buzz of my phone. A message from an unknown number. You're digging too deep, Mia. Sometimes love costs more than money. My heart froze. I looked around the empty room, the city lights flickering through the glass. My pulse thudded in my ears. Someone knew. Someone was watching. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about missing money. This was a web, and I was trapped in it. The following morning, I noticed a change in Liam. He had started leaving earlier for work, returning later. His phone, once left casually on the table, now stayed in his pocket, locked, silent. When I asked where he'd been, he smiled and said, just working overtime. Trying to fix the mess the finance team made. The irony almost made me laugh. I wanted to scream. To throw the truth in his face, but something in me, perhaps pride, perhaps fear, held me back. I needed to be sure. I needed to see the real Liam before I confronted the mask he wore. A week later, I got my chance. Lily called me in a hushed voice. Mia, you need to come to the office. Now. When I arrived, she handed me a USB drive. One of the IT guys found this hidden folder on Liam's system. He didn't mean to share it, but it's bad, Mia. Really bad. My hands trembled as I inserted the drive. File after file opened, confidential reports, fake signatures, and transaction chains leading straight to offshore accounts, and in one of the folders, a scanned agreement between Liam Carter and an external investor. An investor notorious for hostile takeovers. He had been bleeding my father's company dry from the inside, setting it up for collapse. And when that happened, the rival company would swoop in and buy it for pennies. Liam wasn't just stealing money. He was destroying the empire my father built, and he was doing it with my name attached to the documents, because I was co-signer. For a long time, I sat there, staring at the screen, numb. The world I knew, the man I loved, had turned into a lie, but even then, beneath the heartbreak, something else began to stir inside me. Not fear. Not sorrow. Fire. A cold, calculated fire. If Liam thought he could use me, ruin my family, and walk away untouched. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know whose daughter he had betrayed. When I finally left the office that night, the world outside felt colder, as if the city itself knew the truth I carried. The skyscrapers, the flashing lights, even the rain on the pavement looked different. I walked through it all in silence, clutching my bag like a secret weapon. At home, Liam was in the living room, sipping wine, the glow of the television dancing on his face. He looked up and smiled, as if nothing in the world was wrong. "Hey," he said easily. "You're home late again. Workaholic as ever." His voice was soft, warm, but now it rang hollow. Every word from his mouth felt rehearsed, every smile too polished. "I had some reports to finish," I said. My own voice surprised me, calm, almost sweet. Inside, my heart was burning. He poured another glass and offered it to me. I took it, watched the red liquid swirl like blood. "How's your dad?" he asked. "Still obsessed with those quarterly numbers?" I studied him. The casual tone, the faint amusement. "Yes," I said slowly. "He cares about his company. About loyalty." He laughed softly. "Loyalty? In business? That's cute." And there it was, the first real crack in his mask. Over the next few days, I watched him carefully. I learned to mirror his lies, to hide behind smiles the same way he did. I began collecting things, copies of contracts, voice recordings, emails. If he wanted a game, I would play it better. One evening, I visited Lily in her office. She looked exhausted, but her eyes carried that fierce loyalty that had bound us since childhood. "Mia, are you sure you want to handle this yourself?" she whispered. "Your father deserves to know." "Not yet," I replied. "If he finds out now, it will destroy him, and Liam will vanish before we can stop him." "So what's the plan?" I looked out the window, at the city pulsing with indifferent light. "I'll make him confess," I said quietly. "And I'll make him lose everything." The trap took weeks to build. I convinced Liam that I was being pushed out of the company, that my father was planning to hand control to another executive. I watched his eyes light up, watched greed flicker like a spark in gasoline. "That's unfair," he said one night, pretending to be sympathetic. "You've done so much for that place." I smiled. If only there were a way to prove my worth, to make my father see that I can handle the company myself. He hesitated, then leaned forward. "Maybe there is." Hook. Line. He started talking, about connections, about how he could bring in investors who would back me, secretly of course, until I gained control. His words were smooth, his lies elegant. He believed he was the mastermind. I just let him believe it. Every message he sent, every meeting he scheduled, every secret deal, I recorded it all. And slowly, I began to understand the full scope of his betrayal. He wasn't just stealing money. He was preparing to collapse Shabazz Global from the inside, file for bankruptcy, and then rebuild it under his own name, using my signature. Using me. The night it all came crashing down started with rain. He came home late, soaked, smiling, humming to himself. "Big news," he said, shaking off his coat. "Our investors are ready. One more week, and we'll be free from your father's shadow." I poured him a drink, my hand steady. That's wonderful, Liam. He grinned. You sound calm. I thought you'd be nervous. Oh, I'm not nervous, I said softly. I'm just done pretending. He frowned. What do you mean? I placed a folder on the table. Do these look familiar? He opened it and froze. Inside were printed copies of every transaction, every fake signature, every offshore account. I stepped closer. You used my name, my position, my trust. You used me to destroy my father's company. He tried to speak, Mia, listen, but I didn't let him. Don't. I've listened to your lies long enough. For the first time, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened. His voice turned hard. You think you can threaten me with paperwork? You're naive, Mia. Everything was legal. Every deal was approved by you. He wasn't wrong. The documents carried my digital signature. If this went public, I would fall with him, but what he didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that I had already moved 3 steps ahead earlier that week. With Lily's help, I had quietly gathered a team of legal and cyber experts. We traced every offshore account, found proof of Liam's private communications, and linked them to the rival investor who had bankrolled him. I had also transferred copies of everything, recordings, data, witness statements, to my father's private lawyer, and tonight, as Liam stood there, smirking in false confidence, I clicked send on my phone. Every file went straight to law enforcement and the company's board. A notification blinked on my screen. Delivered. Liam's phone buzzed seconds later. His expression shifted from arrogance to confusion, then fear. What did you do? I smiled. I just returned your gift. You wanted the company? Congratulations, you'll own its debts, its crimes, and its downfall. He lunged toward me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said quietly. The police are already on their way. For the first time, I saw him as he truly was, not charming, not confident, not even dangerous. Just small. The next hours blurred into flashing lights, uniformed officers, and silence. Liam was arrested on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and corporate sabotage. The evidence was airtight. He looked at me once as they led him away, eyes full of disbelief. You set me up, he hissed out. I met his gaze and whispered, No, Liam. You set yourself up. I just made sure you wouldn't get away with it. After it was over, I went to my father's office. He stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. When he turned to face me, there was both pride and sorrow in his eyes. I thought I'd lost the company, he said. But I almost lost my daughter instead. You didn't, I replied softly. You raised me to fight. He nodded. And you fought well. That night, I sat alone in the quiet of my room, watching the city lights shimmer beyond the window. The air smelled of rain and closure. Liam's betrayal still hurt, it always would. But beneath the pain was something sharper, cleaner. Power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the rich daughter or the fragile lover. I was something else entirely. Someone no one should ever underestimate again, and that's how the girl who once fell in love by the ocean became the woman who burned her past to protect her future, the girl who loved with her heart, learned to fight with her mind. And the man who thought he could break her learned that even broken hearts can strike back. They say heartbreak breaks you only once, after that, every scar becomes armor. I didn't believe that until the night Liam was taken away. 4 days after his arrest, the house felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by memories. The scent of his cologne still lingered in the hallway. His jacket still hung by the door. Every corner whispered of a love that never truly existed. I didn't cry. Not once. But every breath I took felt like fire in my lungs, the kind that burns, not because you're weak, but because you're alive again. I started spending my mornings in my father's office. The air there smelled of old wood, ink, and legacy. The company had survived the scandal, but barely. Stocks were down, partners were hesitant, and whispers followed me everywhere. She's the one who married the fraud. She didn't see it coming. Maybe she was part of it. I heard every word. I remembered every face, and I promised myself, by the time I was done, those whispers would turn into silence. The first step wasn't revenge. It was survival. I buried myself in work. I learned every system, every loophole, every forgotten policy of my father's empire. I spent sleepless nights going through files Liam had sabotaged, rebuilding them. One painful line at a time. Lily was always there. "You don't have to do this alone," she said once, handing me a cup of coffee. I smiled faintly. "I do. Because this isn't just about saving the company, Lily. It's about taking back my name." She nodded. "And after that?" "After that," I said, my voice steady, "I'll make him feel everything I felt, but worse. The world doesn't stop moving just because your heart is broken." Within weeks, Liam's trial made headlines: corporate fraud, Shabazz global betrayal, insider reveal scheme. But what no one expected was how quickly the narrative shifted. Some of Liam's associates, the same men who had helped him, began leaking statements. They claimed I knew about the transactions, that I signed documents willingly, that I was part of the plan. Suddenly, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the accomplice. News outlets started showing my picture again, but not as the golden daughter of a business tycoon. I was the fallen heiress. The woman too blinded by love to see the truth. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled at the camera when reporters cornered me outside the courthouse. "I may have been blind once," I said. "But I'm not anymore." That single sentence went viral, and that's when something changed. People stopped seeing me as broken. They started seeing me as dangerous. I began receiving letters from investors, from old partners of the company, even from journalists who wanted interviews. Everyone wanted to know how I survived, how I faced betrayal and still stood tall. I gave them pieces of my truth, not all, never all. Just enough to make them believe in my strength. Behind the scenes, I was rebuilding more than just a business. I was rebuilding myself. I started training with our financial and legal advisors, learning how to handle negotiations, board meetings, and media appearances. I turned pain into precision. Every success, every recovery deal signed in my name, it wasn't just for the company. It was a message. To the man sitting in a cold cell, thinking he destroyed me, "I'm not the woman you broke. I'm the woman who's going to bury your legacy." Then one morning, an envelope arrived at my office. No sender. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a note written in Liam's handwriting: "You think you've won, Mia. But you've only built a higher place to fall from." For the first time in months, I felt my pulse race. Not with fear, but with rage. He wasn't done. And neither was I. That note wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. And if he wanted a war, he would get one. That night, I sat on the balcony of my penthouse, looking down at the city lights. Rain began to fall again, soft and cold, like the night I exposed him. I thought about everything he'd taken: love, peace, reputation. And then I thought about everything I still had: power, control, and time. I whispered to the rain, "You wanted to ruin my world, Liam. Now I'll make you wish you'd never stepped into it." First I took away his people. You'd be surprised how many crimes depend on silence, on shared dinners, on mutual nods across mahogany tables. I started with whispers turned into questions. I gave carefully framed interviews where I mentioned that I had more proof than anyone knew. I gave nothing usable, only the right implication. I let reporters smell a bigger scandal. Liam's friends began to call him less. He found that the men who once drank with him in private rooms suddenly had board meetings and urgent flights they couldn't miss. Invitations evaporated. The phone that once buzzed with offers now rattled with subpoenas. Pride is an ugly thing when it realizes it's alone. I watched him at the trial, not a showy scene, mind you. I sat in the second row and kept my face neutral while my lawyer passed notes to the prosecutors. He squinted at me across the room, searching for weakness. He wouldn't find it. I had an audience of tens of millions, the public, the board, the press, and they were all waiting for what would come next. Then I cut the lifelines. Money is a language, and I learned to speak it fluently. With Lily and our legal team, we traced every shell company, every transfer, every backdoor clause. Offshore accounts were frozen through court orders. The rival investor who had been grooming the takeover found his funding channel closed. His lawyers called me, pleading ignorance, offering deals. I listened, smiled, and kept the files. I engineered meetings with the company's creditors. I presented an austerity plan, restructuring that prioritized employee wages, client contracts, and the firm's long-term viability, but that required immediate halts to risky withdrawals and enforcements on suspicious receivables. The creditors agreed, and with their consent, banks began to place liens, to demand collateral, to scrutinize every invoice. Liam woke up to bounce checks and canceled cards. His offshore accounts were dry. Funds were traced and reclaimed as part of an ongoing fraud investigation. When you live in shadows, sunlight is the worst thing. Every bank transfer he had trusted evaporated under subpoenas and forensic audits. He had built a house of cards. I pulled the tablecloth out. I didn't want him languishing in rumor. I wanted him accountable. My father's lawyer, Arif, and I orchestrated civil suits alongside criminal charges. Civil suits were brutal. They required public depositions, documentation under oath, and constant legal pressure. Liam's name was dragged through the mud in paperwork, and in sworn testimonies his bravado shrank, but I also wanted evidence that could not be denied. So I struck deals with a few of his lesser partners, men who had been promised future rewards in exchange for their silence. I offered them immunity in exchange for testimony. They took it. They gave me names, dates, precise account numbers, and the exact language his emails used to hide payments. Men who ate dinner with him were now writing statements about how he had celebrated the takeover before it even happened. At the hearing when those men spoke, their voices were not dramatic. They were clinical. Businessmen don't revel in melodrama, they state facts. Those facts built a ladder to the truth. Then I moved to the part of revenge people rarely consider, the mind. A man like Liam, confident, practiced, lived on perception. If he believed no one would see him, he was untouchable. I needed him to see. I authorized the release of selected documents to specific news outlets, not all, not in one flood, but in a steady drip. Each release had a purpose, a timeline that showed how quickly his greed escalated. An email thread where he joked about the safety net he had arranged. An invoice labeled with my name that he had forged and considered routine. They printed the emails. They ran the screen grabs. The public began to map the arc of his deceit. At home, he could feel the floor beneath him tremble. Calls came from former clients who wanted refunds. Suppliers demanded settlements. The comfortable strangers in his life now wore skeptical masks. He started sleeping with the lights on. He stopped making plans past next week. I had not only taken his money, I had taken his future. I could have been colder. I could have reduced him to the sum of his assets and walked away. But this was not just about ruin. It was about making him feel what betrayal feels like. I met him once, alone, in a room where the walls absorbed everything. He had been released on bail by then, thinner, paler, eyes rimmed in dark regret. His voice was a whisper edged with incredulity. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you do this?" I looked at him for a very long time. "Because you used me," I said. "Because you thought my name and my family were tools." I let my words land. "Because you wanted an empire and you were willing to burn ours to build it." His hands trembled. "You could have come to me. We could have shared." Shared? The word fell flat. He had not shared. He'd exploited. I wanted him to say sorry, real, bone-deep remorse. He couldn't. What he offered instead were explanations that sounded like excuses wrapped in entitlement. I walked him through a timeline of his own words, voice recordings. The jokes he made, the contracts he signed. Each one mattered. I watched the man who had looked at me like a future disintegrate into the raw man who had signed away another person's life for profit. That was the moment I realized, humiliation is a power tool. When a person sees himself reflected back in his worst acts, he begins to consume himself. The final public blow came in a shareholders' meeting staged as a strategic announcement. I had invited press, regulators, and the board. I presented, with surgical calm, a reconstruction plan that required immediate fiscal transparency and appointed an external committee to audit every recent transaction. It was a move that would protect the company but leave Liam exposed. He tried to stand, tried to speak. The room's temperature dropped. Where once he had commanded respect with a laugh and a confident hand on a shoulder, now he stood like a child accused at the school assembly. His attorneys whispered, his eyes pleaded. Then the call came, from the federal prosecutor. New charges, imminent arrest. The men who'd once smiled at his jokes now avoided his gaze. They took him away in cuffs as the meeting dispersed, his face a mask of disbelief. I watched him go and felt nothing dramatic, no triumph, no gloating. Only the cool certainty of a job completed. Revenge is a heavy cloak. I wore it, but it weighed me down in ways I didn't anticipate. There were quiet nights when I'd catch my reflection and not recognize the woman who stared back. I found myself replaying moments, measuring what was lost beyond material, the gentle mornings, the brief laughter, the illusion of intimacy. Those losses were real. Justice took back what was stolen, but it could not return the innocence or undo the daily routine of trust. My father came to me once, placed a steady hand on my shoulder and said, "You saved this place. But remember, saving something doesn't mean you must be left with the ashes of everything else." He spoke of rebuilding life. Not just balance sheets. Lily remained my shadow, fierce, loyal. The friend who had held my hand during depositions and the nights I couldn't breathe. She would joke sometimes, attempting to pull me back to laughter. "You made the papers cry," she'd say, half proud, half worried. Her voice was the only one that kept me human. People often ask me later whether I regretted what I did. They expect a flash of tearful repentance or a shrug that says it was all worth it. The truth is more complicated. I did not take pleasure in his collapse. The satisfaction was an echo, small and necessary, a correction. The thing I wanted most was to make sure no one ever treated my family like collateral again. I wanted my name intact. I wanted the company to survive, but vengeance, even when right, changes the seeker. It sharpens edges, dims softness. There was a woman in me who loved and wanted to forgive. She did not survive unchanged, and yet, from those ashes rose someone else, someone who could stand under fluorescent lights and negotiate with men who had once dismissed her. Someone who could face the press and the board without flinching. Someone who refused to be used. Weeks after Liam's sentence tightened and the legal net closed, life settled into a new rhythm. The company stabilized. Clients returned. The market breathed. But the world is rarely so clean. New enemies lingered in corners, small opportunists, people who profited from chaos, and I watched them like a hawk. I traveled occasionally for business now. Not as a daughter who needed a chaperone, but as a leader who was beginning to leave her own mark. I made changes that seemed small: a better whistleblower system, stricter vendor verifications, public transparencies that made covert deals harder to hide. Those changes were my invisible revenge, structures that would prevent the next Liam, and in the quiet hours, I still dreamed of the ocean at the retreat. I remembered the way his hand had felt in mine, the softness that had lied. Sometimes I would think, not of him, but of a different life, one where the hurt had been mended with forgiveness and quiet mornings. But that was a life I had traded for this one, and the trade had been made, the war had been won, but the cost lingered. I had learned the blueprint of ruin and the blueprint of rebuilding. I had become both judge and architect, and in time, I learned how to hold that role without becoming the thing I had destroyed. The night the verdict came, the city slept under rain again. It was as if every storm in my story wanted to return for its closing act. Liam Shaw, convicted on multiple counts of corporate fraud and forgery. Sentenced to 12 years, the reporters wanted a reaction, but I gave them silence. I simply walked down the courthouse steps, heel steady, face unreadable. Inside me, it wasn't triumph that rose. It was stillness, the kind that follows a long scream finally exhaled. Revenge doesn't sound like thunder. It sounds like a clock finally ticking again after years of being stuck. For months, I had chased that moment, the declaration, the closure. And now that it had come, I found myself wondering what to do with the quiet that followed. The company was healing. Investors had returned, the brand was rebuilding, and my father's trust in me had transformed into something stronger than before: respect. But in the spaces between meetings and press conferences, I would sometimes stop and listen. The silence inside me was vast. You spend so long fighting an enemy that when the battle ends, you must learn to live without the war. 3 months later, I asked for permission to see him. Everyone thought I was mad. Lily argued for hours. Why would you face him again, Mia? You owe him nothing. I owe myself peace, I told her. The prison was colder than I expected: steel doors, fluorescent lights, air that smelled of bleach and hopelessness. He was brought into the visiting room in gray uniform, eyes sunken, skin pale. For a moment, we just stared at each other, two people who had once shared a life now separated by bulletproof glass. You came, he said quietly, as if it surprised him. I did. Why? Because I wanted to see what was left, I said. And because I needed to forgive you, not for you, but for me. He flinched, the word forgive hitting harder than any accusation. Mia. He stopped, swallowed hard. I didn't think you'd survive what I did. I didn't, I said honestly. The woman you broke didn't survive. But someone else grew where she fell. His eyes filled with something: guilt, regret, or maybe just exhaustion. I lost everything, he whispered. No, I corrected softly. You lost everyone. There's a difference. When the guard signaled the end of visiting time, I stood. I don't hate you anymore, Liam. Hating you kept me tied to the worst parts of my life. I'm done carrying your ghost. I left without looking back. Behind me, I heard him exhale, not quite a sob, not quite relief. Maybe both. After that visit, I slept through an entire night for the first time in years. The morning sun looked different, not blinding. Just warmed out. I started new projects in the company. Ones focused on rebuilding trust, ethical finance programs, scholarships for underprivileged business students, especially women. People called it rebranding. I called it redemption. My father once said, strength without compassion turns to cruelty. Now I understood what he meant. My revenge had restored justice, but it was compassion that would keep it from consuming me. Lily and I sat on the office terrace one evening, watching the city lights blink awake. "You really went to see him?" she asked again. "I did." "And it helped?" "It did," I said simply. "I forgave him so I could finally stop thinking about him." She smiled softly. "You always were the brave one." "No," I corrected. "I was just the one who learned bravery the hardest way." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "What will you do now?" "Live," I said. "Not fight, not chase, just live." A month later, a letter arrived at my office, handwritten, no return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. "Mia, you were right. I built my empire on your trust, and when it fell, I saw the truth. I never built anything real. If you can, remember me not as the man who betrayed you, but as the man who made you find yourself. That may be the only good I ever did." Li read it once, then placed it in a drawer. I didn't reply. Some stories don't need an ending, they just need to stop echoing. That night, I walked by the sea, the same place where this entire story began. The water shimmered silver under the moonlight. I remembered the girl I had been, the woman I had become, and the thin, fragile bridge that connected the two. For the first time, I didn't see the ocean as a memory of love lost. I saw it as a mirror, deep, endless, forgiving. It's strange how silence can become the loudest sound. For months I had lived on adrenaline, meetings, headlines, confrontations, justice. Then, one morning, I woke to birds outside my window instead of my phone buzzing. The war was over. My father's company had returned to profit. The board appointed me executive director. People spoke my name with respect again. Yet, in that stillness, I realized the fight had taken something I couldn't list on a balance sheet, the rhythm of ordinary life. So I began small. Breakfast with my father before work. Coffee with Lily that didn't involve strategy. Music playing in the office again, for the first time in years. The sound of laughter didn't feel like betrayal. Behind our headquarters there was an unused courtyard, cracked tiles, wild ivy, forgotten benches. I decided to restore it. Each weekend I traded business suits for gloves, turning soil with my own hands. Lily teased me, "The CEO gardening? That'll make headlines." I smiled. "Then let them see I'm growing something that doesn't need profit to survive." The garden became my quiet rebellion against the world that measured worth in numbers. When the first jasmine bloomed, its scent filled the courtyard like a promise that beauty could grow even from the ruins of deceit. 6 months later, during a charity event in the city, I met a journalist who had covered my case. He shook my hand gently. "You changed more than your company, Mia. You changed how people see resilience." "Resilience?" I repeated. He nodded. "You proved that surviving doesn't mean hardening. It can mean softening in the right places." That night his words echoed through me. Maybe revenge hadn't been my story's ending, maybe it had only been the bridge to something larger. Understanding. Lily received a promotion offer abroad, a leadership role in our partner branch. When she told me, her eyes shone with both excitement and guilt. "I can't leave you alone here." I laughed softly. "You were never meant to guard me forever. Go. Build your own world." She hugged me, whispering, "You taught me what strength looks like." "No," I said, smiling through tears. "You reminded me what friendship feels like." When she boarded her flight, I realized that letting go of the people you love isn't loss. It's trust. A year after Liam's sentencing, I returned to the coastal retreat where we had first met. The place looked the same, white sands, waves curling against the shore, but everything inside me had changed. I walked barefoot along the water, letting it erase my footprints as I went. Each wave that touched my ankles felt like time whispering, "You've done enough." I sat on a rock and closed my eyes. The sea breeze smelled of salt and beginnings. I remembered his laughter, our vows, the lies that followed, but they no longer hurt. They were simply chapters, necessary, painful, and past. That evening, back at the villa, I opened my journal, the same one I had once filled with plans for revenge, and began to write something new. To the girl I used to be. You were brave, even when you thought you were broken. You loved deeply, and it almost destroyed you, but that love also made you strong enough to rebuild. Forgive yourself for not seeing the lies. Forgiveness is the final revenge. Live kindly. Trust carefully. And when you fall in love again, because you will, let it be with yourself first. I signed it Mia Shah, not the heiress. Not the avenger, just the woman who had survived. Months later, the garden at the company was in full bloom. Employees often ate lunch there now, laughing, forgetting that this space had once been dead. I stood by the window of my office, watching sunlight spill across the leaves. Lily sent photos from abroad, my father planned his semi-retirement, and the world quietly moved forward. As for me, I was learning to live without a mission, to wake each day not to fight, but simply to exist. The fire inside me hadn't died. It had turned into light. People think blood means violence, but I learned it also means life. My vengeance had been born of pain, but what flowed through me now was not anger, it was vitality, resilience, clarity. Liam's chapter closed the moment I forgave him. My chapter began the moment I forgave myself, and so, if anyone ever asks how I survived betrayal, I will tell them this: I didn't survive because I sought revenge. I survived after I learned to let it go. The sea keeps no scars. It keeps moving, shining, forgiving. And like the sea, so do I.